we have a very, very interesting first speaker with us today, a candidate who is going to run for New York State Controller. So New York State Controller is a very important job. It takes into account a number of things. They're investing our money, and they oversee the situation in the state of New York, which obviously needs a lot of overseeing. So I'm going to bring on to this morning Joseph Hernandez. So Joseph called me a while ago to introduce himself to me, that he was going to be a candidate for controller. I've done some background research in Joseph, and it amazes me what I've seen. So here is a man who was born in Cuba, came to the U.S. at age 7 after his father was imprisoned by the Castro regime. The family values of hard work and education are what has made this individual who he is. So when you hear what I'm about to tell you, it amazes me. So the family settled in Florida. He graduated from the University of Florida in 1996 with a Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience. After, he received a Master of Science in Molecular Genetics. He has an MBA in 1998 with a focus on finance and entrepreneurship. In 2023, received another degree, a Master of Science in Chronic Disease. He's also has degrees from the University of Oxford. So this is a person who started in biology, medicine, molecular genetics, microbiology, marketing, and finance. A very, very well-rounded individual who started his work career in 1998 for Merrick, and then went on to several different positions, but more importantly to me, opened a number of businesses. He's really an entrepreneur. And again, just as importantly, in 2017, this individual, Joseph Hernandez, gave a donation of $10 million to the University of Florida. So he realized where he came from, how he got to where he was, and he's certainly somebody with a community-minded spirit, someone who wants to give back to the community, and that's really what him becoming controller would be all about. So, Joseph, I'm amazed at your background. So I'm glad to have you on the show, glad to introduce you to our Western New York audience. So how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. Really appreciate it. It's a delight to be with you on a cold Saturday morning here from New York City.
Well, you're not in Buffalo, where the snow is falling and it's cold here in Buffalo.
You know what makes up for the coldness in Buffalo? It's the people. I've just been so delighted by the quality and caliber of people I've met in Buffalo. So kudos to you guys, and that kind of warmth is all through through upstate and western New York. It's just amazing the quality of people up there. So kudos to all of you guys for that.
Well, I appreciate it. As I mentioned to you, I have a friend of mine who similarly came from Cuba because of Castro regime. His father was a doctor in Cuba and was treated very badly, and so they sent the kids away. He ended up in New York and became a school teacher here. He's a very close friend of mine. So tell us a little bit about that background. What happened in that situation when you were 7 years old?
Yeah, as you mentioned, my story starts in a town in Cuba called Camagüey, and it's really a testament to how socialism doesn't really work, and it really removes the people that add value to these societies. During Castro's revolution in '59, most of the intellects and contributors to the people that had businesses and so forth left. My father was one of the few that stayed behind, thinking that the Castro regime would last, and of course it lasted, in the entire lifetime of Castro. But right around the 1970s or so, late 1970s, my dad had a conflict with one of the local communists, and in Cuba, the local communists are the ones that really dictate a lot of what happens in those communities. And there was a conflict about my father not wanting to give up more property and so forth. And so they threw him in prison. That's what they do. And so my father was sentenced to 7 years in prison. And unfortunately only served about one of those years because he got encephalitis in prison. He was in a cell with about 7 different individuals. Most of them died. He was in a coma for about 9 months. And then when he came out of the coma, he was partially paralyzed. And then, of course, the Castro regime was like, what are we going to do with this guy? Lucky for us, it was around the 1980s when the Mariel boatlift was happening. And we were lucky enough to leave Cuba and come to our amazing adopted country that has just given us a new start and everything we have. So we're quite grateful for that experience.
So you ended up in Florida then?
We did, yeah. We started our life in Miami, Florida, and we had nothing, of course, because even though my family had a lot of businesses in Cuba, we came with nothing. And my father washed dishes, and my mom cleaned houses to put food on our table. And they taught us a number of very important lessons. One was, to work because nothing was for free in this society, and to get educated because that was our ticket out of that situation that we were in. But more importantly, they taught us to love this country. My dad was probably the most patriotic person I ever met. He had such deep love for this country, and because of that, we fell in love with America. And they always reminded us that at some point in our lives we would have to repay that debt that this great society and the American people gave to us. And that's the way that's the way I was raised, and that's the way I raised my kids. I think it's so important. It's a lesson that we all need to teach our kids. This is an amazing society. We have, I'm a scientist, so I like to calculate numbers. We have, we have less than a 2% chance of being American, which is, like winning the lottery. And I always remind my kids that they won the lottery by being born here. And I think we need to feel pride in that. It's an amazing society.
So many first, second generation individuals who come to this country have that same kind of ethic. I mean, my father was first generation born here. My grandparents were born in Italy. And again, it was all about hard work, dedication, family, and education. That's what it was about. And you're an example of that from the same kind of background. Now, so let's get into your education a little bit, because obviously you must be a very, very bright individual. So you start out with a degree from the University of Florida, a bachelor's degree in science. And what drives you from there?
Well, I come from a long line of physicians. All my cousins who live in America are doctors, and so I was kind of following the family path, if you would, from a scientific perspective. And so I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to change the world and make medicines that made people's lives better. And so I studied in neuroscience, which is the study of the central nervous system and the brain, and that was kind of my original path. I started that in Florida, and the way I got into this specific area was really serendipity. I was looking for a job as a freshman in college because I needed to support myself, and I walked around the laboratories, and there was one lab that needed somebody to wash dishes, like my father. Kind of continued the generational thing, I think. But I started washing dishes in the lab and picked up. It happened to be a neuroscience lab, and that's why I picked up the science and went from there. And wanted to have a career in science. And as I went through graduate school, I have a graduate degree in molecular genetics, focusing on gene therapy, and I found myself reading the Wall Street Journal quite a bit, and so became kind of intrigued by business as well, and that's how I got into the business element of it.
So you got an MBA then?
I did, yeah. I was finishing up my graduate degree, and I convinced my committee to let me, in parallel, do a master's in business and in finance. So that's where I got my finance background, and really fell in love with this concept of bringing the science out of the lab into the marketplace for the betterment of humanity. And that's where I started my career. After that educational endeavor, I worked with Merck, the pharmaceutical giant, which, by the way, is one of the great American stories on the corporate side. A very ethical company. They have defined healthcare in many arenas, and but they always did the right thing, and that was the basis of my corporate education, which I'm so thankful for.
But you went on from Merck to a number of different positions, including the creation of a number of different companies. Tell us a little bit about how that goes about.
Well, I went to I was at Merck for a number of years and got really a good corporate education there. Understanding how to develop medicines, how to market them, and how to effectively create markets in that sector. And then randomly, I was contacted by a company in Silicon Valley, and I always was entrepreneurial. That was kind of my background, and took on an endeavor and a startup at the time, a company called Affymetrix, that was doing really revolutionary stuff in the area of genomics. It was around the time that we were sequencing the whole human genome. So I was intrigued by that area of development and went there, and we built a company from nothing to, at one point, it was a $4 billion market capitalization company. So we were really pioneers in a sector. And the great thing about Silicon Valley is that they let a young punk like myself take the lead on a lot of projects. So I was quite successful there in leading projects and so forth. And that's where I got my entrepreneurial bug. I really wanted to do my own things, if you would, and subsequently was involved in a number of different companies that we brought public on NASDAQ and have really, in my opinion, changed medicine for the better, and I'm really proud of that work.
So I see in your background the number of companies that you really started. Again, I'm so impressed with this background and your ability to put the American dream into motion and make it work for you. And then the philanthropy part of you, the donation to University of Florida, that's pretty impressive and amazing, because you're a young man yet, and you got I presume, a young family. That is...
Well, I think we forget that in this society, you can come from nothing, like I did. My dad was, again, a dishwasher. My mom cleaned houses. And you can achieve greatness. I mean, if you look at all the great companies we have in our society, they all come from these people that have this great ambition, who are likely, were born into nothing, right? They sort of fought their way up, and through hard work and, and getting educated and never giving up. And, I failed a lot. I mean, it's always easy to talk about the successes, but, there's probably equal numbers, if not of failures. And I think that is the American way. I mean, you get back up, you keep fighting, and you try to create a legacy bigger than you. And that only happens in America. And again, I just, whenever I have an opportunity to relay that feeling, I do, because I think, when we live here, we kind of forget those opportunities. We forget that most of the world is not like this. Most of the world, in most parts of the world, if you fail, you're done for life, right? In Japan, for example, if you start a company and you fail, you lose your circle of friends. You're never able to start another company. In other societies, you don't have the opportunity to raise capital like we do in America, and take risk capital and create, a flower shop or a mechanic shop or a company that transforms the world in artificial intelligence. Those things don't happen anywhere else but in America. And, the formula here of high-risk takers, people who are hungry, people who work hard, is a very unique set of formulas that only exist in this great society. And I think you have to get back when you have an opportunity, and not only financially but politically. Look, I'm running for politics not because I think I'm going to get rich or because I think, I need the power. I certainly think my life will be less exciting from a financial perspective as comptroller, but I think you have to feed into this great society that we have and that we're so lucky. Our founding fathers always said that we needed to have a society where the citizen legislator was the way that we ran government. We don't want career politicians. That's how the original founders wanted.
All right, Joseph. So now you're going to venture into politics as a brand new situation for you. You haven't been involved in politics before, right?
Well, I had a little short stint at the mayoral race in New York City as an independent, although I've been a Republican my whole life. And I did that because I couldn't believe that in the greatest city, the most capitalistic city that built this country, we had a socialist, communist taking control. That's really my first foray into it. But I got to tell you, I learned a lot, and I'm here at this particular race, really running as a Republican under the Republican Party, and my intent is to have an impact in how we run this in the state.
So tell us now about the controller situation. So explain to people what the New York State Controller actually does, and where we are at this point.
You know, the controller is one of these roles that people don't understand, but it's actually an incredibly powerful role. The role, and it's an independent voted role, and the primary role is to protect taxpayers' dollars as the fiscal watchdog for the state. And that entails a number of different responsibilities. One is ensuring that we do audits, making sure, and by the way, in companies, we do this all the time. In a publicly traded company, every quarter, every 3 months or so, you do an audit. You look at the financials, you look at where money was spent, how it was spent, was it spent correctly, were there any malfeasance? So you do that quarterly. It's a very structured way that we do things, and that's how you create trust in the system. I am bewildered that we don't formally do that in government, especially in a government with a budget the size of New York. It's almost $250 billion budget. And so we have no real oversight currently. So one of the things, the important role of the comptroller is to make sure that we audit and we make sure that dollars are spent correctly and make sure that individuals are not stealing from the hard-earned dollars that the taxpayers put in to the system. So it's a fiscal watchdog. And then the second very important responsibility is the comptroller of New York is a sole trustee for the pension fund. And the pension fund in New York, the state of New York, is a $290 billion pension fund. It's one of the largest in America, the third largest, I believe, or the second largest, depending on the day. And that is the money that the people that have given their lives to the state employees that contribute to the pension, they depend on that for retirement and so forth. So the responsibility to ensure that you get the greatest amount of return from that fund is one of the other important roles of this particular position. And it has the ability to audit all agencies that touch the dollar. So that includes city and municipalities, like the city of New York, for example, where all the dollars flow through, from state dollars. The NYPD, the Department of Education in New York City gets federal, state dollars. Any of those agencies, the controller has the right to audit. And every contract over $50,000, the controller gets to sign off on. So it's an immense power of control and fiduciary responsibility that is really much needed in government. And for the last, several decades, the role has not been used effectively. And that's why we see this crazy abuse in government that gets us all upset.
So it's meant to be a checks and balance situation, isn't that correct? I mean, the controller is there to do the checks and balances of what's happening in the state, do the audits, make sure money is invested properly, but, much more than that.
Yeah, and to make sure that there's fiscal stability in the state. So you're kind of a corporate CFO. We call these roles, chief financial officers in corporations. So you're really the watchdog that has financial oversight over the state finances. So while you don't structure policy and legislation, you ensure that the dollars are spent correctly and wisely and legally, and it's a very important role. Again, it hasn't been used effectively, in my opinion. We've been asleep at the wheel here on both of these big responsibilities, and my intent is to change that, to make sure that we apply, logical, conservative, Republican ideals of small government, and making sure that, government doesn't abuse us, because right now I can guarantee you the people that are deploying the capital in the state of New York are abusing our dollars.
Joseph, my name is Russ Gugino, and I serve. I'm Russ Gugino. I serve on the conservative committee here in Erie County, friend of Ralph's, and help him out a little bit on these shows. I just wanted to ask you, what's the difference between an audit from the Tom DiNapoli's office, the controller's office, and a certified accountant's office audit of a municipality? What's the difference? Is it as thorough?
Yeah, very different. I mean, look, there's the grades of audits, right? There's the public markets. We do these audits called PCAOB audits, which are incredibly detailed, and they're very fine, detailed review of financial payments and inflows and outflows of cash. What the comptroller historically has done in the state is really a very high level audit, and the audits have been mostly reactionary. They're not true audits like we know in the business world. They're not forensic in nature. They usually happen a number of years after things occur. We had a situation where we've shown that the MTA, the employees of the MTA, effectively stealing from the MTA by claiming overtime and so forth. We didn't catch that until years later, and a real-time audit system would have caught that almost instantly. So one of the things I want to deploy from an audit perspective is using these new technologies that exist, these technologies that are using basically artificial intelligence that are able to ensure that every dollar is going to the right place at the right time, making sure that there's no abuse, making sure one of the things people do to abuse the system is they'll double bill. And unfortunately, we don't have audit mechanisms to catch that. So you can have a vendor, for example, if you're building a bridge in Broome County and you have a construction company, that entity could potentially bill several times, and we don't have the systems to catch that. Very basic ways to ensure that, again, we don't overpay, making sure that there's no, phantom companies that are getting paid, making sure that you don't have, someone's cousin on the payroll that the government has to pay for. So these are things that need to be looked at very, very diligently. And there's technology today to be able to do that real time. So as it's happening, as these dollars are going out, you're able to make sure that the payments occur. I mean, look, there's fraud in every element of government. If you look at, for example, in the Medicaid system, the people getting benefits don't even live in the state. I mean, it's just asinine. It's not appropriate. It's not fair to the people that pay taxes here. And we got to do something about it. There's
Joseph, you just hit on a topic that I wanted to pursue a little bit more. Does the Comptroller's Office have the ability to audit Medicaid?
Absolutely, yeah. The Medicaid.
Why aren't they doing it?
Good question. I mean, I think it's Pandora's box. Nobody wants to open that because there's a lot of personal things in there that people probably don't. The politicians probably don't want to be tagged with. But I tell you, look, this is supposed to be an independent role. It's supposed to be the fiscal watchdog of the state. It's supposed to be, while it has a political title to it, it's supposed to be an apolitical title where you do what is in the best interest of the taxpayers. In corporate America, we call this a fiduciary duty. You have a fiduciary duty to make sure that every dollar is spent wisely. And we're not using the power of that office to ensure that occurs. And I'm going to change that. And audits are the first step of that. I mean, I think the other thing we need to do is deploy technology to make sure that, technology catches a lot of this stuff. I mean, there's existing technology. We don't have to recreate it, that allow you to basically measure every inflow and outflow of dollar to ensure that it goes to the right people, to ensure that it's, done appropriately. And we haven't deployed that, and I plan to do that. And I guarantee you, look, we're going to catch a lot of malfeasance here. And part of my plan is to work very closely with the AG's office. Hopefully we have a Republican in that office, the Attorney General, and we're going to make sure that the people who are really stealing from our taxpayers pay the price. And I guarantee you we're going to find that, because there's no way that this government is running efficiently without fraud and abuse. I guarantee you we're going to find it. I hope we don't find a lot of it, and I hope it's not so severe that, we lose faith in government. But we need this level of oversight. This is how you create trust in the system.
Joseph, it reminds me of the expenditure that Hochul did during COVID when she spent, I can't remember exactly what it was now, but she spent billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, paid more for either the COVID tests or
masks and tests. Masks and tests.
She's overpaid for all of that. And no one obviously looked into it.
It went to a major donor, I believe. A major donor was the one that got a no-bid contract for hundreds of millions of dollars to assist in COVID.
That's insane. Look, that abuse, it just makes you lose faith in government. It makes you not want to contribute to the system that, we all have to contribute to. It's not what it's supposed to be like. Look, another example is, and they're sort of backpedaling from this, but, there was a $10 million slush fund created for Letitia James' defense, a legal defense.
Yes.
And DiNapoli approved it. That is not the intent of the office. It's certainly not the intent of taxpayers to pay someone's legal fees that's getting criminally prosecuted. I think things like that just make you lose faith in government. And my goal is to make sure that we bring, first of all, we bring logic to everything, because there's a lot of illogical things that happen here, and also to use the office to ensure that this fraud and abuse stops, to revamp the way we invest in the pension system. And then, this is a lot of money, $290 billion. It's hard to imagine how much money what that looks like, but, we could do some really great things for the state on the economic development side. The responsibility as a sole trustee of this fund by the comptroller is to make sure that money gets invested and that there is returns, significant returns for the pensioners of that fund. Last year the return was only 5.8%, which is mediocre. It's dismal. You would get fired on Wall Street if you ran a fund and that's what you return. So we have to do better, because every dollar that every percentage point that you bring to that fund is effectively $3 billion that you don't have to contribute to the pension fund. There's no need for taxpayers to step up and have to write the check. So why not use the money to make the money so taxpayers don't have to add to the system? But with regards to the fund, one of the other things that I like to do is I want to set aside $10 billion for economic development, specifically in upstate and in western parts of New York. If you really think about the history of this region, this is where IBM, where Kodak, where Corning, where General Electric, where Remington were born. These are companies that have transformed the American landscape and the world, I would say. We have neglected these geographies for many, many years, and it's been primarily, in my opinion, because of politics, because these are mostly conservative Republican regions that are not in the interest of Albany to support. And I think that's wrong. Irrespective of your political ideology, that's wrong. So my plan is to use these dollars, use about $10 billion of economic development to bring companies to these regions, making sure we get a return, because that is our fiduciary duty. We have to make sure that we get significant returns on those investments, but to bring companies there that are going to create the next generation of technologies, that are going to employ the people in these regions, that are going to create a tax base so that these regions flourish, and we have people living there, and we have the next generation of inhabitants of these counties want to stay there, not have to move to New York City or move elsewhere out of the state to make a living. And so we're going to do that. We're going to invest heavily in areas like artificial intelligence, which I'm an expert in, biotechnology, which is where I made my career, in areas of advanced manufacturing, aviation, you name it. We're going to look at the high growth sectors, and we're going to incentivize companies to come to these regions and create the next generation of jobs.
We now have another statewide candidate, this time for Attorney General. This is someone who's got a stellar background. You're going to hear some amazing things about this woman, Saritha. Saritha, I want to pronounce your name correctly, so give it to me, will you?
It's Comatoretti, but you know what? Saritha is I'm the only Saritha you're going to know, so Saritha is just fine.
All right. So look, Saritha, I'm again very impressed with your background. So your parents immigrated here from India, both parents doctors. You are a Harvard-educated individual, so you graduated with your BA from Harvard cum laude. Then you went to law school at Harvard and graduated magna cum laude, pretty impressive from my point of view. You've tried a number of criminal cases. You were law clerk to Judge Brett Kavanaugh in 2010, 2011 at the U.S. Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia Circuit. One of the other very impressive things is you were nominated in 2020 by Trump to become a federal judge yourself. So that's quite a background, Saritha. So tell us a little bit more about your family, about coming here, and then we'll get into some of this about the AG.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Chairman. I really appreciate it. You're right. My parents came from India. My dad came from a very small village in India. No running water, no electricity. He came to this country because of the American dream. And they came here in the early 80s when Reagan was president. And they absolutely adored President Reagan. And we've been lifelong Republicans as a result. And we live Republican values. Growing up, it was drilled into me. You get an education, you work hard, you give back. And that's what I've tried to do. Like you said, I went to Harvard College, Harvard Law School. My family actually started in New York. I was born in Brooklyn, and my parents were doctors at Coney Island Hospital, so we lived on Avenue Z when I was born. And we moved around a little bit in my childhood, but after law school and after clerking for Justice Kavanaugh, I came back to New York to be a terrorism prosecutor. Initially I thought I'd be a doctor like my parents, but then 9/11 happened in my first week of college, and I really wanted to do something to fight terrorism. So that led me to law school, and I wanted to be a terrorism prosecutor, and that's what I did for more than a decade. I prosecuted leaders in Al-Qaeda and ISIS. I also prosecuted leaders in the Mexican drug cartels. I served as chief of staff of the DEA, and as you said, President Trump nominated me to be a judge. And I was incredibly lucky to be able to give back to this country that gave our family so much. And I've looked around. I live in New York State. I have a family here of my own. I have a wonderful husband and 4 kids, 2 sets of twins. And we care a lot about where we live. We care about our community. And we've seen that in the last 5 years, it's gotten less safe. So I want to take the experience that I've been lucky to have and help the state, help New Yorkers, because I think New York needs to have a prosecutor as Attorney General who's focused on New York and focused on safety. And I'm the only prosecutor running.
So, 2 sets of twins. That's impressive. How old are the twins?
They are 6 and 1.
Oh, wow. So you're a mom, and you've got a lot of responsibility, and yet you have excelled as a prosecutor throughout your career. I'm, again, extremely impressed. There's a lot wrong with our current Attorney General. I mean, I've talked about it before. Letitia James has got a lot of problems. I told you I represent over 350 correction officers that were treated extremely badly by her and the governor. They continue to be treated badly. She's got her own criminal problems. I mean, it's amazing that woman is still in office, and it's amazing that a state totally run by one party, totally run by the far left, put up even a defense fund of millions of dollars for this woman. What do you think of all of this?
Well, Chairman, it's a real problem that we have an Attorney General who hasn't used the powers of that office to help New Yorkers. She's just used it for her own political purposes and to go after her political enemies. I mean, going after President Trump was absolutely wrong. And that politicization extends at all levels. I've talked to so many people around the state who tell me about how her office has gone after folks because of who they are and their viewpoints, or what political party they're from. And you see her record, and it's a record of failure because those cases have no merit. She tried to go after President Trump and bankrupt him. The court overturned the penalty.
Right.
She tried to go after the NRA to dissolve it.
Right.
And the court said, You can't do that. You can't dissolve an organization just because you don't like who they are.
Yep.
She tried to go after Exxon for climate change, and the court dismissed the suit because it said that the Attorney General's complaint was, quote, hyperbolic, and they brought the case under the wrong law. They brought a case under securities law, not climate change law. There is no law against what they were doing. So
she went after Pepsi-Cola for bottles that were just discarded.
Yeah, I mean, the Rensselaer County executive, she tried to put him in prison. The jury acquitted. I mean, we see this over and over. And the real problem is, for her, it's not that the cases keep failing because they don't have merit. But what's really, really wrong about that is it just shows that for her, that office, it's not about the law. It's about politics. And that's really a misuse of that power. For her, it's the investigation that's the punishment. And that's not how it's supposed to be. We need to have an Attorney General who's focused on using the law to help New Yorkers. None of those cases helps New Yorkers. And while the office has been distracted by all these political vendettas, New Yorkers have suffered. We know that crime in New York State is up. In the last 6 years, it's up 26%. Drug deaths are up 63%. There's a lot of corruption and fraud in the state grant making. There's a lot of issues you could solve easily if you just had an attorney general who was actually focused on solving them. And that's the attorney general I want to be.
Well, I certainly appreciate. I heard you speak. I see your motivation. I see the kind of support that you have. I truly think that a career prosecutor, someone with the background that you have, is the right kind of ingredients for us to pursue, to have an attorney general that is even-handed, that accomplishes the right goals for New Yorkers, that isn't solely politically motivated as this attorney general is, and certainly someone that in her own background is willing to abuse the law to her own benefit, which is what Letitia James has done.
Yeah, and Chairman, I have found, I launched my campaign on December 1. I was glad to be able to have my first stop be Buffalo. Loved starting out in Western New York. And I've traveled all over the state since then. I've gone up to Northern New York. I was in the Adirondacks yesterday. I've been to the Southern Tier. I've been out to Long Island. And, of course, I live in the city. And I have found that the message of just making New Yorkers safer, having an attorney general who really deeply cares about making the lives of New Yorkers better, that message resonates everywhere. I've gotten support from every corner and every community in New York, from people who know me and from people who don't know me at all. Even one of the defendants I prosecuted reached out, sent a message saying, "Theresa, New York would be safer under your watch. I hope you win." I mean, that's the kind of support that we need to win statewide. And that's why I think we can win statewide this year, because people of all political persuasions are tired of having the state be incompetent and not serve them. And they're tired of having to watch their back and look over their shoulder when they walk down the street in their own communities. So I think New York is ready to elect a Republican. And frankly, not only can we win, we have to win, because otherwise we're really going to see a downward spiral.
So I've read in your background some of the cases that you actually tried. You went after people who created serious problems here in New York. You tried them. You convicted them. It certainly was motivated by the right reasons, not by the reasons that Letitia James has used. But your nomination to the federal bench, you don't get nominated to the federal bench if you don't have a lot of substance behind you and a lot of ability. And so I'm extremely impressed with the fact that you were nominated to the federal bench at what I've got to say is your young age. We need people with this kind of ability, responsibility, and drive in those kinds of situations. I certainly know that as a practicing lawyer for now 51 years. To me, this is exactly the kind of ingredients that are necessary for the next Attorney General.
Well, I appreciate that, Chairman. It was a great honor for me to be nominated by President Trump at the age of 35. When I was nominated, I was the youngest person ever to be nominated to be a federal judge. And, I was vetted by the FBI and by the White House and by the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I was rated well qualified for that job. And it really was a nomination based on my credentials and the record of excellence I brought to my job, where I have a record of delivering results and winning my cases to help protect America and protect New York.
This is Russ Gugino, a friend of Ralph's, and on the show. I'd like to talk to you just briefly about your great experience with terrorism. Joe Kent, who I know indirectly was the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, was just testifying before the Senate about the number of terrorists that are in the United States today, some estimates of maybe 20,000 or maybe more than 20,000. What kind of a threat do terrorists have, particularly in New York State?
Well, there have been reports, unfortunately, over the last, the 4 years of the Biden administration when our borders were open, there are several public reports of folks who are on the terrorist watch list coming through the border, and that's a huge, huge concern. We have the very best Joint Terrorism Task Force in New York. I used to serve on it with members of the FBI and the New York State Police and the New York City Police Department. And those folks are just the best of the best in tracking down people and seeing if they are serious about committing harm to the United States and stopping them before that happens. And I was personally involved many times in those cases in tracking down people. Some of it's public, some of it's not public. A lot of the work that they do is behind the scenes, and it's great work, and that's why we have to, can never forget the incredible sacrifices the men and women of law enforcement make to keep us safe. You're right. We can't lose sight of that threat. We have to be vigilant, and part of that means making sure, the state police are part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. We've got to keep that presence. We've got to increase that presence and make sure that we work well with the federal government and the local police and local law enforcement so that we have seamless coordination across the law enforcement communities, across the intelligence communities, and we can stop any attack that's coming our way.
So we've got to take a hard break here in a very short time. But to me, what people are concerned about in New York and what this whole election is going to be about is affordability and safety. And you're the safety part of it. I think that's going to be the major issue in this race. Tell us, we've got one more minute left. Tell us how you plan to handle the safety issue that has been so neglected by this Attorney General.
Of course, number one, we've got to prosecute crime and enforce the laws, which means when there are DAs that don't prosecute crime or just can't because they're strapped for resources, the Attorney General's office has got to step in and prosecute that crime. Under state law, it can. We just don't have an Attorney General right now who's willing to. Second, we've got to take the homeless and the mentally ill off the streets humanely. Do it with compassion, but we've got to do it. And third, we've got to eliminate a lot of the corruption and fraud that we see in state and city government. There's millions of dollars going out the door, and people, the nonprofits and other entities receiving that money are not held accountable. We need to do an audit. We need to do a review, an investigation of all of that. And what I expect we will find is a lot of fraud, a lot of wasted money that we can claw back and put those resources back into law enforcement, back into resources that actually help communities keep them safer. I mean, you're right. The top two issues for New Yorkers are affordability and safety. Safety is the AG's lane. I'm the only prosecutor running for Attorney General. And frankly, I think safety is just a basic human need. It comes first because as affordable as things are, you might want to go live in a certain neighborhood because the housing's cheaper. But if crime is high in that neighborhood, you're not going to do it. It doesn't matter if you bring rents down, you bring prices down. If people don't feel safe walking around in those neighborhoods, they're not going to be able to take advantage of those gains.